The telephone rang. 5, 8, 10 peals. Herzog looked at his watch. The time astonished him. Nearly 6 o'clock. Where had the day gone? The phone went on ringing, drilling away at him. He didn't want to pick it up, but there were 2 children. After all, he was a father, and he must answer. He reached for the instrument, therefore, and heard Ramona, the cheerful voice of Ramona calling him to a life of pleasure on the thrilling wires of New York. And not simple pleasure, but metaphysical, transcendent pleasure. Pleasure which answered the riddle of human existence. That was Ramona. No mere sensualist, but a theoretician, almost a priestess in her Spanish costumes adapted to American needs, and her flowers, her really beautiful teeth, her red cheeks, and her thick, kinky, exciting black hair. Hello, Moses? What number is this? This is the Armenian Relief. Oh, Moses, it's you. I'm the only man you know old enough to remember the Armenian Relief. Last time you said it was the city morgue. You must be feeling more cheerful. This is Ramona. Of course. Who else has the voice that lifts so light from height to height with foreign charm? The Spanish lady. La Navaja en la Liga. Why, Ramona, I never felt less threatened by knives. You sound positively high. I haven't spoken to a soul all day. I meant to call you, but the shop was very busy. Where were you yesterday? Yesterday? Where was I? Let me see. I thought you took a powder. Me? How could that be? You mean you wouldn't run out on me? Run out on fragrant, sexual, high-minded Ramona? Never in a million years. Ramona had passed through the hell of profligacy and attained the seriousness of pleasure. For when will we be civilized beings become really serious? Said Kierkegaard. Only when we have known hell through and through. Without this, hedonism and frivolity will diffuse hell through all our days. Ramona, however, does not believe in any sin but the sin against the body, and her the true and only temple of the spirit. But you did leave town yesterday, said Ramona. How do you know? Are you having me tailed by a private eye? Miss Schwartz saw you in Grand Central with a valise in your hand. Who? That little Miss Schwartz in your shop? That's right. Well, what do you know? Herzog would not discuss it further. Ramona said, Perhaps some lovely woman scared you on the train and you turned back to your Ramona. Oh, said Herzog. Her theme was her power to make him happy. Thinking of Ramona with her intoxicating eyes and robust breasts, her short but gentle legs, her Carmen airs, thievishly seductive, her skill in the sack, defeating invisible rivals, he felt she did not exaggerate. The facts supported her claim. Well, were you running away? She said. Why should I? You're a marvelous woman, Ramona. In that case, you're being very odd, Moses. Well, I suppose I am one of the odder beasts. But I know better than to be proud and demanding. Life has taught me to be humble. Moses shut his eyes and raised his brows. Here we go. Perhaps you feel a natural superiority because of your education. Education? know anything. Your accomplishments. You're in who's who. I'm only a merchant, a petit bourgeois type. You don't really believe this, Ramona. Then why do you keep aloof and make me chase you? I realize you want to play the field. After great disappointments, I've done it myself for ego reinforcement. A high-minded intellectual ninny square. Who? Myself, I mean, she went on. But as one recovers self-confidence, one learns the simple strength of simple desires. Please, Ramona, Moses wanted to say, you're lovely, fragrant, sexual, good to touch, everything. But these lectures. For the love of God, Ramona, shut it up. But she went on. Herzog looked up at the ceiling. The spiders had the moldings under intensive cultivation, like the banks of the Rhine. Instead of grapes, encapsulated bugs hung in clusters. I brought all this on myself by telling Ramona the story of my life, how I rose from humble origins to complete disaster. But a man who has made so many mistakes can't afford to ignore the corrections of his friends. Friends like Sandor, that humped rat, or like Valentine, the moral megalomaniac and prophet in Israel. To all such, one is well advised to listen. Scolding is better than nothing. At least it's company. Ramona paused, and Herzog said, It's true. I have a lot to learn. But I am diligent. I work at it and show steady improvement. I expect to be in great shape on my deathbed. The good die young, but I have been spared to build myself up so that I may end my life as good as gold. The senior dead will be proud of me. I will join the YMCA of the Immortals. Only in this very hour I may be missing eternity. Are you listening? Said Ramona. Of course. What did I just say? That I have to trust my instincts more. I said I wanted you to come to dinner. Oh. If only I were a bitch. Then you'd hang on every word. But I was going to ask you to come to the Italian restaurant. He was clumsily inventing. At times he was cruelly absent-minded. I've shopped already, said Ramona. But how if that snooping Miss Schwartz with the blue spectacles saw me running away in Grand Central? Did I expect you? I figured you had to go to New Haven for the day, to the Yale Library or some such place. Please come. Join me for dinner. I'll have to eat alone if you don't. Why, where's your aunt? Ramona had her father's elderly sister living with her. She's gone to visit the cousins in Hartford. Ah, I see. He thought that old Aunt Tamara must be well used to taking these trips on short notice. My aunt understands such things, said Ramona. Besides, she likes you so much. And she thinks I'm a fine new prospect. Besides, one must make sacrifices for a husbandless niece who has a troubled love life. Just before meeting Herzog, Ramona had broken off with an assistant television producer named George Hoberly, who was hard hit in a pitiable state, close to hysteria. As Ramona explained it, old Aunt Tamara was Hoberly's great sympathizer. Advised him, consoled him, as well as an old woman could. At the same time, she was almost as excited about Herzog as Ramona herself. Meditating on Aunt Tamara, Moses thought he now could better understand Aunt Zelda. The female passion for secrecy and double games. For we must eat our fruit from the wily serpent's jaws. Still, Herzog observed that Ramona had genuine family feeling, and of this he approved. He seemed really fond of her aunt. Tamara was the daughter of a Polish czarist official, something or other. What harm could there be in making him a general? Ramona said about her, "She is very Joan Filet Russe," an excellent description. Aunt Tamara was docile, girlish, sensitive, impulsive. Whenever she spoke of Papa and Mamma and her teachers and the conservatory, her dry breast filled and the collarbones stood out tightly. She seemed still to be trying to decide whether to have a concert career against her papa's wishes. Herzog, listening with serious looks, could not establish whether she had given a recital at the Salle Gavard or wanted to give a recital. Only women from Eastern Europe, with dyed hair and senseless cameo brooches, had easy access to his affections. "Well, then, are you coming or not?" said Ramona. "Why are you so hard to pin down?" "I shouldn't go out. I have a lot to do. Letters to write." "What letters?" "You're such a mystery man. What are these important letters? Business? Perhaps you should discuss it with me, if it is business, or a lawyer, if you don't trust me. But you have to eat anyway, or perhaps you don't eat when you're alone." "Of course I do." "Well, then." "Okay," said Herzog. "Expect me soon. I'll bring a bottle of wine." "No, no, don't do that. I've got some on ice." He put down the phone. She was emphatic about the wine. Perhaps he had given the impression that he was a little stingy. Or else he had awakened a feeling of protectiveness in her, an effect he often produced. He wondered at times whether he didn't belong to a class of people secretly convinced they had an arrangement with fate in return for docility or ingenuous good, will they were to be shielded from the worst brutalities of life. Herzog's mouth formed a soft but twisted smile as he considered whether he really had inwardly decided years ago to set up a deal, a psychic offer, meekness in exchange for preferential treatment. Such a bargain was feminine, or extended to trees, animals, childlike. None of these self-judgments had any terror for him, no percentage now in quarreling with what one was. There was the thing, the composite, the mystical achievement of natural forces and his own spirit. He opened the paisley, Hong Kong robe, and looked at his naked body. He was no child, and the house in Ludeville, a disaster in every other way, had kept him fit. Wrestling with that old ruin in an effort to recover his legacy made his arms muscular. Extended the lease of narcissism a little while. Gave him strength to carry a heavy buttocked woman to the bed. Oh yes, still in fleeting moments the young and glossy stud, such as he really had never been. There were more frightful worshippers of Eros than Moses Elkanah Herzog. But why was Ramona so firm about wine? Maybe she was afraid he'd turn up with California Saturne. Or no, she believed in the aphrodisiac power of her own brand. That might be it. Or else he harped more on the subject of money than he knew. A last possibility was that she wanted to surround him with luxuries. Glancing at his watch, Herzog, with an appearance of efficiency or purpose, failed anyway to fix the time in his mind. What he did observe, stooping to the window to get an angle over roofs and walls, was that the sky was reddening. He was astonished that a whole day had been spent scrawling a few letters. And what ridiculous angry letters. The sight and frenzy in them. Zelda, Sandor. Why write to them at all? And the Monsignor. Between the lines of Herzog's letter, the Monsignor would only see a mad, reasoning face, just as Moses saw the brick of those walls between these rods caked in asphalt black. Endless repetition threatens sanity. Suppose that I am absolutely right, and the Monsignor, for instance, absolutely wrong. If I am right, the problem of the world's coherence and all responsibility for it becomes mine. How will it make out when Moses E. Herzog has his way? No, why should I take that on myself? The Church has universal understanding. This I consider a harmful Prussian delusion. Readiness to answer all questions is the infallible sign of stupidity. Did Valentine Gersbach ever admit ignorance of any matter? He was a regular Goethe. He finished all your sentences, rephrased all your thoughts, explained everything. I want you to know, Monsignor, that I am not writing with the purpose of exposing Madeline or to attack you. Herzog tore up the letter. Untrue. He despised the Monsignor, wanted to murder Madeline. Yes, he was capable of killing her. And yet, while filled with horrible rage, he was able also to shave and dress to be the citizen on the town for an evening of pleasure, groom-scented and his face sweetened for kisses. He did not flinch from these criminal fantasies. It's the certainty of punishment that stops me, Herzog thought. Time to clean up. He turned from the desk and the deepening light of the afternoon, and, dropping the robe, entered the bathroom and turned on the water in the basin. He drank in the obscurity of the cool tiled room. New York has the sweetest water in the world for a metropolis. Then he began to soap his face. He could look forward to a good dinner. Ramona knew how to cook and how to set a table. There would be candles, linen, napkins, flowers. Perhaps the flowers were being rushed from the shop now in evening traffic. On the windowsill of Ramona's dining room, pigeons roosted. You heard wings flapping in the air shaft. As for the menu, on the summer evening like this, she'd probably prepare Vichy sauce, then shrimp Arnaud, New Orleans style, white asparagus, a cool dessert, rum-flavored ice cream with raisins, brie and cold water biscuits. He was judging by previous dinners, coffee brandy, and all the time Egyptian music on the phonograph in the adjoining room. Mohammed El-Bakar plays Port Said with zithers, drums, and tambourines. In that room was a Chinese rug, the light of the green lamp deep and quiet. Here also she had fresh flowers. If I had to work all day in a flower shop, I would want to be pursued by the smell of flowers at night. On the coffee table, she had art books and international magazines. Paris, Rio, Rome, all were represented. Invariably also the latest presents from Ramona's admirers were displayed. Herzog always read the little cards. For what other reason did she leave them? George Hoberly, for whom she was cooking shrimp. Arnaud last spring still sent her gloves. Still sent her gloves, books, theater tickets, opera glasses. You could trace his love-crazed wanderings up and down New York by the labels. Ramona said he didn't know what he was doing. Herzog was sorry for him. The bluish-green carpet, the Moorish knickknacks and arabesques, the wide, comfortable sofa bed, the Tiffany lamp with glass like plumage, the deep armchairs by the windows, the downtown view of Broadway and Columbus Circle. And after dinner, when they were settling down here with coffee and brandy, Ramona would ask whether he wouldn't like to take off his shoes. Why not? A free foot on a somber night eases the heart. And by, going by precedents, she'd ask why he was so abstracted. Was he thinking of his children? Then he'd say he was shaving now, scarcely glancing in the mirror, finding the stubble with his fingertips. He'd say that he was no longer worried about Marco. The boy had a firm character. He was one of the more stable breed of Herzogs. Ramona then would give him a level-headed advice about his little daughter. Moses would say, how could he abandon her to those psychopaths? Could she doubt that they were psychopaths? Did she want to look again at the letter from Geraldine, the frightful letter that told what they were doing? And there would follow another discussion of Madeline, Zelda, Valentine Gersbach, Sandor, Himmelstein, and Monsignor Dr. Edvig Phoebe Gersbach. Against his will, like an addict struggling to kick the habit, he would tell again how he was swindled, conned, manipulated, his savings taken, driven into debt, his trust betrayed by his wife, friend, physician. If ever Herzog knew the loathsomeness of a particular existence, knew that the whole was required to redeem every separate spirit, it was then, in his terrible passion, which he tried impossibly to share, telling his story. Then in the midst of it, the realization would come over him that he had no right to tell, to inflict it, that his craving for confirmation, for help, for justification was useless. Worse, it was unclean. For some reason, the French word suited him better, and he said, immonde. And again, more loudly, c'est immonde. However, Ramona would tenderly sympathize with him. No doubt she genuinely pitied him, though the injured are, for primitive reasons, unattractive and even ludicrous. In a spiritually confused age, however, a man who could feel as he did might claim a certain distinction. He was beginning to see that his particular brand of short-sightedness, lack of realism, and apparent ingenuousness conferred a high status on him. For Ramona, it evidently surrounded him with glamour, and provided that he remained macho, she would listen with glistening eyes, with more sympathy and more. She transformed his miseries into sexual excitements, and to give credit where it was due, turned his grief in an useful direction. Cannot agree with Hobbes that there is no overawing power. Men have no pleasure, voluptas, in keeping company, but instead, molestia, a great deal of grief. There is always an overawing power, namely one's terror. To set aside these theoretical considerations, however, when he was done, having drunk 4 or 5 glasses of Armagnac from the Venetian decanter, far above the Puerto Rican disorders of the street, it would be Ramona's turn. You treat me right, I treat you right. He continued shaving, like a blind man, by touch and by sound, the sound of bristle and blade. Ramona was highly experienced at entertaining gentlemen. The shrimp, wine, flowers, lights, perfumes, the rituals of undressing, the Egyptian music, whining and clanging, bespoke practice, and he regretted that she had to live this way, but it flattered him also. Ramona was astonished that any woman should find fault with Moses. He told her that he was often a flat failure with Madeline. It might be the release of his angry feeling against Maddie that improved his performance. At this, Ramona looked severe. "I don't know. It might be me. Have you considered that?" she said. "Poor Moses, unless you're having a bad time with a woman, you can't believe you're being serious." Moses rinsed his face with pleasure, witch hazel, a brimming handful, and blew upon his cheeks from the corners of his mouth. He tuned in Polish dance music on the small transistor radio on the glass shelf over the sink, and powdered his feet. Then he gave in for a while to the impulse to dance and leap on the soiled tiles, some of which came free from the grout and had to be kicked under the tub. It was one of his oddities in solitude to break out in song and dance, to do queer things out of keeping with his customary earnestness. He danced out of the number until the Polish commercial. Okny, Pinch Okny, Pinch Avenue, Flushing. He mimicked the announcer in the ivory-yellow gloom of the tile bathroom, the water closet, as he anachronistically called it. He was ready to go for another polka when he discovered, breathing hard, that the sweat was rolling down his sides and that another dance would make a shower necessary. He didn't have the time or patience for that. He couldn't hear the thought of drying himself. One of those killing chores he had always hated. He put on clean drawers, socks. In stocking feet, he trod the toes of his shoes to bring out a dull shine. Ramona did not like his taste in shoes. Before the window of the Bally shop on Madison Avenue, she pointed at a pair of ankle-high Spanish boots and said, "That's what you need, those vicious-looking black things." Smiling, she looked upward so that he was confronted by the brightness of her eyes. She had marvelous, slightly curved white teeth. Her lips would part and close over these significant teeth, and she had a short, curved French nose, small and fine hazel eyes, thick, vivid black hair. The weight of her face was mainly in the lower part. A slight defect, in Herzog's view. Nothing serious. "You want me to dress up like a flamenco dancer?" said Herzog. "You ought to use a little imagination about clothes, encourage certain aspects of your character." You would think, Herzog smiled broadly, he was a piece of human capital, badly invested. To her surprise, perhaps, he agreed with her. Almost cheerfully he agreed. Strength, intelligence, feeling, opportunity had been wasted on him. What he could not see, however, was that such Spanish shoes, which, by the way, greatly appealed to his childish taste, would improve his character. And we must improve. Must. He put on trousers, not the Italian pants. They'd be uncomfortable after dinner. One of the new poplin shirts was next. He removed all the pins. Then he put on the Madras jacket. He bent down to see. He could see of the harbor through the small opening of the bathroom window. Nothing in particular, only a sense of water bounding the overbuilt island. It was a movement of orientation that he was making, like the glance at his watch, which did not tell him the time. And next came his specific self, an apparition in the square mirror. How did he look? Oh, terrific. You look exquisite, Moses. Smashing. The primitive self-attachment of the human creature, that sweet instinct for the self, so deep, so old, it may have a cellular origin. As he breathed, he was aware of it, quiet but far-reaching, all through his system, a pleasing hunger in his remotest nerves. Dear Professor Haldane. No, that was not Herzog's man at this moment. Dear Father Teilhard de Chardin, I have tried to understand your notion of the inward aspect of the elements. That sense organs, even rudimentary sense organs, could not evolve from molecules described by mechanists as inert. Thus, matter itself should perhaps be studied as evolving consciousness. Is the carbon molecule lined with thought? His shaven face muttering in the mirror, great shadows under the eyes. That's okay, he thought. If the light's not too bright, you're still a grand-looking man. For a while yet, you can get women. All but that bitch, Madeline, whose face looked either beautifully or haggy. Go then, Ramona will feed you, give you wine, remove your shoes, flatter you, soothe down your hackles, kiss you, pinch your lip with her teeth, then uncover the bed, turn down the lights, and go into the essentials. He was half elegant, half slovenly. That had always been his style. If he knotted his tie with care, his shoelaces dragged. His brother Shura, immaculate in his tailored clothes, manicured and barbered at the Palmer House, said this was done on purpose. Once it had perhaps been his boyish defiance, but by now it was an established part of the daily comedy of Moses E. Herzog. Ramona often said, "You're not a true, puritanical American. You have a talent for sensuality. Your mouth gives you away." Herzog could not help putting his fingers to his lip when it was mentioned. But then he laughed the whole thing off. What remained to bother him was that she did not recognize him as an American. That hurt. What else was he? In the service, his mates had also considered him a foreigner. The Chicagoans questioned him suspiciously. What's on State and Lake? How far west is Austin Avenue? Most of them seemed to come from the suburbs. Moses knew the city much better than they. But even this was turned against him. You should just memorized everything. You're a spy, that proves. One of them smart Jews. Come clean, Mosa. They're gonna drop you by parachute, right? No, he became a communications officer, discharged for asthma, choked by fog in the Gulf of Mexico on maneuvers, losing contact owing to his hoarseness. Except that the whole fleet heard him groan. We're lost. Fucked. But in Chicago in 1934, he was class orator at the McKinley High School, his text taken from Emerson. He didn't lose his voice then, telling the Italian mechanics, Bohemian barrel makers, Jewish tailors, the main enterprise of the world for splendor is the upbuilding of a man. The private life of one man shall be a more illustrious monarchy than any kingdom in history. Let it be granted that our life, as we lead it, is common and mean. Beautiful and perfect men we are not now. The community in which we live will hardly bear to be told that every man should be open to ecstasy or a divine illumination. If he had lost craft and crew somewhere near Biloxi, that didn't mean he wasn't in earnest about beauty and perfection. He believed his American credentials were in good order. Laughing, but pained too, he remembered that a chief petty officer from Alabama had asked him, Where did you learn to speak English? At the Bullet School? No, what Ramona meant, as a compliment, was that he had not lived the life of an ordinary American. No, his peculiarities had governed him from the start. Did he see any great value or social distinction in this? Well, he had to endure these peculiarities, so there was no reason why he shouldn't make use of them, a little. But speaking of ordinary Americans, what sort of mother would Ramona make? Would she be able to take a little girl to Macy's parade? Moses tried to imagine Ramona a priestess of Isis in a tweed suit watching the procession of floats. Dear McSiggins, I read your monograph. The ethical ideas of the American business community, a field day for McSiggins. Interesting. Would have appreciated closer investigation of hypocrisy, public and private, in the American accounting system. Nothing to prevent the individual American from claiming as much merit as he likes. By degrees, in populistic philosophy, goodness has become a free commodity like air, or nearly free, like a subway ride. Best of everything for everybody, help yourself. No one much cares. The honest look, recommended by Ben Franklin as a business asset, has a predestinarian, Calvinistic background. You don't cast doubts on another man's election. You may damage his credit rating. As belief in damnation vanishes, it leaves behind solid formulations of reliable appearances. Dear General Eisenhower, in private life, perhaps, you have the leisure and inclination to reflect on matters for which, as chief executive, you obviously had no time. The pressure of the Cold War, which now so many people agree was a phase of political hysteria, and the journeys and speeches of Mrs. Dooley's rapidly changing in this age of shifting perspectives from their earlier appearance of statesmanship to one of American wastefulness. I happened to be in the press gallery at the UN the day you spoke of the risk of error in precipitating nuclear war. That day I put down a deposit on a chandelier, an old gas fixture, really on 2nd Avenue. Another $10 squandered on Louisville. I was present also when Premier Khrushchev pounded the desk with his shoe. Amid such crises, in such an atmosphere, there was obviously no time for the more general questions of the sort I have been concerned with. Indeed, put my life into. But what do you want him to do about that? I gather from the book, my Mr. Hughes, however, and from your letter to him expressing concern about spiritual values, that I may not be wasting your time in calling your attention to the report of your own Committee on National Aims, published at the end of your administration. I wonder whether the people you appointed to it were the best for the job. Corporation lawyers, big executives, the group now called the industrial statesmen. Mr. Hughes has noted how you were shielded from distressing opinions, insulated, as it were. Perhaps you will be asking yourself who your present correspondent is, whether a liberal, an egghead, a bleeding heart, or a nut of some kind. So let us say he is a thoughtful person who believes in civil usefulness. Intelligent people without influence feel a certain self-contempt, reflecting the contempt of those who hold real political or social power, or think they do. Can you make it all clear in a few words? It's well known he hates long, complicated documents. A collection of loyal, helpful statements to inspire us in the struggle against the communist enemy is not what we needed. The old proposition of Pascal, 1623 to 1662, that man is a reed, but a thinking reed, might be taken with a different emphasis by the modern citizen of a democracy. He thinks, but he feels like a reed bending before centrally generated winds. Ike would certainly pay no attention to this. Herzog tried another approach. Tolstoy, 1828 to 1910, said, "Kings are history's slaves. The higher one stands in the scale of power is entirely personal. That man is free whose condition is simple, truthful, real. To be free is to be released from historical limitation. On the other hand, J.W.F. Hegel, 1770 to 1831, understood the essence of human life to be derived from history. History, memory, that is what makes us human, that and our knowledge of death. By man came death, for knowledge of death makes us wish to extend our lives at the expense of others, and this is the root of the struggle for power." "But that's all wrong," thought Herzog, not without humor in his despair. "I'm bugging all these people. Nehru, Churchill, and now Ike, whom I apparently want to give a great books course." Nevertheless, there was much earnest feeling in this too. No civil order, no higher development of mankind. The goal, however, is freedom. And what does a man owe to the state? It was with such considerations, reading your committee's report on national aims, that I seem to have been stirred fiercely by a desire to communicate, or by the curious project of attempted communication, or bent by the disguised passion, offering these ideas about death and history to the commander of SHAEF, like mocking flowers, grown in the soil of fever and unacted violence. Suppose, after all, we are simply a kind of beast, peculiar to this mineral lump that runs around the orbit to the sun. Then why such loftiness, such great standards? That I thought of the variation on Gresham's famous law: public life drives out private life. The more political our society becomes, in the broadest sense of political, the obsessions, the compulsions of collectivity, the more individuality seems lost. Seems, I say, because it has millions of secret resources. More plainly, national purpose is now involved with the manufacture of commodities in no way essential to human life, but vital to the political survival of the country. Because we are now all sucked into these phenomena of gross national product, we are forced to accept the sacred character of certain absurdities or falsehoods whose high priests not so long ago were mere pitchmen and figures of derision, sellers of snake oil. On the other hand, there is more private life than a century ago, when the working day lasted 14 hours. The whole matter is of the highest importance, since it has to do with invasion of the private sphere, including the sexual, by techniques of exploitation and domination. His tragic successor would have been interested, but not like Nor Linden. Their governments could not function without intellectuals, physicists, statisticians. But these are whirling, lost in the arms of industrial chiefs and billionaire brass. Kennedy was not about to change this situation either. Only he seemed to have acknowledged privately that it existed. A new idea possessed Moses. He would offer an outline to Harris Pulver, who had been his tutor in 1939 and was now the editor of Atlantic Civilization. Yes, tiny, nervous Pulver, with his timid, whole-souled blue eyes, his crumbled teeth, the profile of Gizeh's mummy, as pictured in Robinson's Ancient History, the taut skin hectically spotted with high color. Herzog loved this man in his own immoderate, heart-flooded way. "Listen, Pulver," he wrote. "A marvelous idea for a much-needed essay on the inspired condition. Do you believe in transcendence, downward as well as upward? The terms originate with Jean Wahl. Shall we concede the impossibility of transcendence? It all involves historical analysis. I would argue that we have fashioned a new utopian history, an idyll, comparing the present to an imaginary past. Because we hate the world as it is, the hatred of the present has not been well understood. Perhaps the first demand of emerging consciousness in this mass civilization is expressive. The spirit released from servile dumbness spits dung and howls with anguish stored during long ages. Perhaps the fish, the newt, the horrid, scampering, ancestral mammal find their voice and add their long experience to this cry. Taking up the suggestion, Pulver, that evolution is nature becoming self-aware in man. Self-awareness has been accompanied at this stage with a sense of a loss of more general natural powers, of a price paid by instinct, by sacrifices of freedom, impulse, alienating labor, etc. The drama of this stage of human development seems to be the drama of disease, of self-revenge, an age of special comedy. What we see is not simply the leveling of de Tocqueville predicted, but the plebeian stage of evolutionary self-awareness. Perhaps the revenge taken by numbers, by the species, on our impulses of narcissism, but also on the demand for freedom, is inevitable. In this new reign of multitudes, self-awareness tends to reveal us to ourselves as monsters. This is undoubtedly a political phenomenon, an action taken against personal impulse or against the personal demand for adequate space and scope. The individual is obliged, or put under pressure, to define power, as it is defined in politics, and to work out the personal consequences of this for himself. Thus he is provoked to take revenge upon himself, a revenge of derision, contempt, denial of transcendence. This last, his denial, is based upon former conceptions of human life or on images of man at present impossible to maintain. But the problem, as I see it, is not one of definition, but of the total reconsideration of human qualities, or perhaps even the discovery of qualities. I am certain that there are human qualities still to be discovered. Such discovery or recovery is only hampered by definitions which hold mankind down at the level of pride or masochism, asserting too much and then suffering from self-hatred as a consequence. But you will be wondering what happened to the inspired condition. This is thought to be attainable only in the negative, and is so pursued in philosophy and literature as well as in sexual experience, or with the aid of narcotics, or in philosophical gratuitous crime and similar paths of horror. It never seems to occur to such criminals that to behave with decency to another human being might also be gratuitous. Intelligent observers have pointed out that spiritual honor or respect formerly reserved for justice, courage, temperance, mercy, may now be earned in the negative by the grotesque. I often think that this development is possibly related to the fact that so much of value has been absorbed by technology itself. It is good to electrify a primitive area. Civilization and even morality are implicit on technological transformation. Isn't it good to give bread to the hungry, to clothe the naked? Don't we obey Jesus in shipping machinery to Peru or Sumatra? Good is easily done by machines of production and transportation. Can virtue compete? New techniques are in themselves bien pensant and represent not only rationality, but benevolence. Thus a crowd, a herd of bien pensants, had been driven into nihilism, which, as is now well known, has Christian and moral roots, and for its wildest frenzies offers a constructive rationale. See Polanyi, HERZOG, et al. Romantic individuals, a mass of them by now, accuse this mass civilization of obstructing their attainment of beauty, nobility, integrity, intensity. I do not want to sneer at the term romantic. Romanticism guarded the inspired condition, preserved the poetic, philosophical, and religious teachings, the teachings and records of transcendence, and the most generous ideas of mankind during the greatest and most rapid of transformations, the most accelerated phase of the modern scientific and technical transformation. Finally, Pulver, to live in an inspired condition, to know truth, to be free, to love another, to consummate existence, to abide with death in clarity of consciousness, without which racing and convening to evade death. The spirit holds its breath and hopes to be immortal because it does not live, is no longer a rarefied project. Just as machinery has embodied ideas of good, so the technology of destruction has also acquired a metaphysical character. The practical questions have thus become the ultimate questions as well. Annihilation is no longer a metaphor. Good and evil are real. The inspired condition is therefore no visionary matter. It is not reserved for gods, kings, poets, priests, shrines, but belongs to mankind and to all of existence. And therefore, Herzog's thoughts, like these machines in the lofts he had heard yesterday in the taxi stopped by traffic in the garment district, plunged and thundered with endless, infinite, hungry electrical power, snitching fabric with inexhaustible energy. Having seated himself again in his striped jacket, he was gripping the legs of his desk between his knees, his teeth set, the straw hat cutting his forehead. He wrote, "Reason exists. Reason." He then heard the soft, dense rumbling of falling masonry, the splintering of wood and glass, the belief based on reason, without which the disorder of the world will never be controlled by mere organization. Eisenhower's report on national aims, if I had had anything to do with it, would have pondered the private and inward existence of Americans first of all. Have I explained that my article would be a review of this report? He thought intensely, deeply, and wrote, "Each to change his life, to change." Thus I want you to see how I, Moses E. Herzog, am changing. I ask you to witness the miracle of this altered heart, how, hearing the sounds of slum clearance in the next block and watching the white dust of plaster in the serene air of metamorphic New York, he communicates with the mighty of this world, or speaks words of understanding and prophecy, having arranged at the same time a comfortable and entertaining evening, food, music, wine, conversation, and sexual intercourse. Transcendence or no transcendence. All work and no games is bad medicine. Ike went trout fishing and played golf. My needs are different. More in Herzog's vein of wide-eyed malice. The erotic must be admitted to its rightful place. At last, in an emancipated society which understands the relation of sexual repression to sickness, war, property, money, totalitarianism. Why, to get laid is actually socially constructive and useful, an act of citizenship. So here I am in the gathering dusk, the striped jacket on my back, sweating again after my wash, shaved, powdered, taking my underlip with my teeth nervously, as if anticipating what Ramona will do to it, powerless to reject the hedonistic joke of a mammoth industrial civilization on the spiritual desires, the high cravings of a Herzog, on this moral suffering, his longing for the good and true. All the while his heart is contemptibly aching. He would like to give his heart a shaking or put it out of his breast, evict it. Moses hated the humiliating comedy of heartache. But can thought wake you from the dream of existence? Not if it becomes a second realm of confusion, another more complicated dream, the dream of intellect, the delusion of total explanations. He had gotten a significant warning once from Daisy's mother, Polina, when he had fallen in love for a while with his Japanese friend Sono. And Polina, the old Russian Jewish suffragette, 50 years a modern woman, in Zanesville, Ohio, from 1905 to 1935, Daisy's father drove a soda pop and seltzer truck there, descended on him. Neither Polina nor Daisy actually knew anything about Sono Ugoki then. What a lot of romances, thought Herzog, one after another. Were those my real career? But Polina flew in great-haired and wide-hipped, with her bag of knitting, an elegant, determined person. She arrived with a Quaker Oats box filled with apple strudel for Herzog. He still felt a pang at the loss of her strudel. It was truly great. But he was aware that his greed for it was childlike, and that there were adult questions to be decided. Polina had the peculiar stiffness and severity of the emancipated women of her generation. Once a beauty, she was now very dry in appearance, with gold octagonal glasses and the sparse white hairs of an old woman at the corners of her mouth. They spoke in Yiddish. "What are you going to become?" said Polina. "Ein Uschhorf? Ausgelassen? Outcast? Dissolute?" The old lady was Tolstoyan puritanical. She did eat meat, however, and she was a tyrant. She was frugal, arid, clean, respectable, and domineering. But there was nothing so tart, sweet, soft, and fragrant as her strudel made with brown sugar and green apples. It was extraordinary how much sensuality went into her baking. And she never gave Daisy the recipe. "Well, what about it?" said Polina. "First one woman, and then another, then another. Where will it end? You can't abandon a wife, a son for these women, whores." I should never have had these explanations with her, thought Moses. Was it a point of honor to explain myself to everyone? But how could I explain? I myself didn't understand, didn't have a clue. He stirred. He'd better be on his way. It was growing late. He was expected uptown. But he was not yet ready to leave. He took a new sheet of paper and wrote, "Dear Sono." She had gone back to Japan long ago. When was it? He turned his eyes upward as he tried to calculate the length of time, and he saw the white clouds rolling above Wall Street and the harbor. I don't blame you for going home. She was a person of means. She owned a house in the country, too. Herzog had seen the colored photographs, an oriental countryside with rabbits, hens, piglets, and her own hot spring in which she bathed. She had a picture of the village blind man who came to massage her. She loved massages, believed in them. She had often massaged Moses, and he had massaged her. "You were right about Madeline, Sono. I shouldn't have married her. I should have married you." But Sono had never really learned to speak English. For 2 years she and Moses had conversed in French, petit nègre. He wrote, "Ma chérie, ma vie est devenue un cauchemar affreux. C'est-tu savoir?" At McKinley High School, from a forbidding spinster, Miss Mellordovich, he had learned his French. The most useful course I took. Sono had seen Madeline only once, but once was enough. She warned me as I sat in her broken Morris chair. "Mozo, mefi-toi. Pren garde, mozo." She had a tender heart, and Herzog knew that if he wrote her of the sadness of his life, she would certainly cry. Instantaneous tears. They had a way of appearing without the usual Western preliminaries. Her black eyes rose from the surface of her cheeks, in the same way that her breast rose from the surface of her body. No, he would not write her sad news of any sort, he decided. Instead, he allowed himself to picture her as she might be now. It was morning in Japan, bathing in her steaming spring, her small mouth open, singing. She bathed often and sang as she washed, her eyes upcast and her lips dainty and tremulous. The songs were sweet and odd, narrow, steep at times, with cat-like sounds. During the troubled time, when he was being divorced from Daisy, and he came to visit Sono in her West Side apartment, she would immediately run the little tub and fill it with Macy's bath salts. She unbuttoned Moses' shirt, took off his clothes, and when she had him settled, "Easy now, it's hot," in the swirling, foaming, perfumed water, she let drop her petticoat and got in behind him, singing that vertical music of hers. "Chin, chin, je te lève les dos, mon mozo." As a young girl, she had gone to live in Paris, and she was caught there by the war. She was down with pneumonia when the American troops entered, and was still sick when she was repatriated via the Trans-Siberian Railroad. She no longer cared for Japan, she said. The West had spoiled her for life in Tokyo, and her rich father allowed her to study design in New York. She told Herzog that she was not sure she believed in God, but that if he did, she would also try to have faith. If, on the other hand, he was a communist, she was prepared to become one too. Because les Japonais sont très fidèles. Elles ne sont pas comme les Américains. Bah! Still, American women also amused her. She often entertained the Baptist ladies who were her sponsors with the immigration department. She prepared shrimp or raw fish for them, or treated them to the tea ceremony. Moses sometimes sat waiting on the stoop of the brownstone opposite when the ladies were slow to leave. Sono, with great enjoyment, she was greedy for intrigue, the abysses of female secrecy, would come to the window and give him the high sign pretending to water her plants. She grew little ginkgo trees and cactuses in yogurt containers. On the west side she occupied 3 rooms with high ceilings. At the back there grew an ailanthus tree, and one of the front windows contained a giant air conditioner. It must have weighed a ton. 14th Street bargains filled the apartment, and overstuffed Chesterfield, bronze screens, lamps, nylon drapes, masses of wax flowers, articles of wrought iron and twisted wire and glass. Here Sono went back and forth busily on bare feet, coming down on her knees sturdily. Her lovely body was covered unbecomingly in knee-length bargain negligees, bought on the stands near 7th Avenue. Every purchase involved her in a battle with the other bargain hunters. Excitedly, holding her soft throat, she would tell Herzog with sharp cries what had happened. Chérie, j'avais déjà choisi mon tablier. Cette femme foncée c'est moi. Woo! Elle est attente Moando, et grande, d'hier immense, immense poitrine, et sans soutien-gorge. Tout est fait, comme Niagara Fall, and Chernobyl. Sono puffed out her cheeks and crooked her arms as though suffocating with fat, thrusting out her belly, then displaying her rump. Je disais, no, no, lady, I hear first. Elle avait les bras comme se enflés, et quel gorge. Il avait dû monter au balcon. No, déjà. No, no, lady. Proudly, Sonia showed her nostrils, made her eyes heavy and dangerous. She set a hand on her hip. Herzog, in the broken Morris chair from the Catholic salvage, said, "That's the stuff, Sono. They can't push the samurai around on 14th Street." Abed, he had touched Sono's eyelids experimentally, as she lay smiling. Those strange, complex, soft, pale lids would keep the imprint of a touch for quite a while. "To tell the truth, I never had it so good," he wrote, "but I lacked the strength of character to bear such joy." Bingo. Sorry, that was just a personal reflection. That was hardly a joke. When a man's breast feels like a cage from which all the dark birds have flown, he is free, he is light, and he longs to have his vultures back again. He wants his customary struggles, his nameless empty works, his anger, his afflictions, and his sins. In this parley of Oriental luxury, making a principled quest, principled, mind you, for life-giving pleasure, solving for Moses E. Herzog a puzzle of the body, curing himself of the fatal disorder of worldliness, which rejects worldly happiness, this Western plague, this mental leprosy, he seemed to have found his object. But often he sat morose, depressed in the Morris chair, while curse such sadness. But she liked even that. She saw me with the eyes of love, and she said, "Ah, t'es mélancolique, t'es très bien." It may be that guilt and sadness made me look Oriental, a morose, angry eye, a long upper lip, what people used to call the Chinese gleep. It was bien to her. And no wonder she thought I might be a communist. The world should love lovers, but not theoreticians. Never theoreticians. Show them the door. Ladies, throw out these gloomy bastards, hence loathed melancholy. In dark Cimmerian desert ever dwell. Sono's 3 tall rooms in the brownstone apartment were hung with transparent bargain curtains, like the Far East in the movies. There were many interiors. The inmost was the bed, with sheets of spearmint green or washed out chlorophyll, unmade, everything in disorder. After the bath, Herzog's body was red. When she had dried and powdered him, she dressed him in a kimono, her pleased but still slightly unwilling Caucasian doll. The stiff cloth crumpled him under the arms as he sat on the pillows. She brought him tea in her best cups. He listened to her talk. She could tell him the latest scandals of the Tokyo press. A woman had mutilated her unfaithful lover and was found with the missing parts in her obi. A locomotive engineer slept through a signal and killed 154 people. Her father's concubine was now driving a Volkswagen. She parked at the gate of the house, for she was not allowed into the yard, and Herzog thought, "Is this really possible? Have all the traditions, passions, renunciations, virtues, gems, and masterpieces of Hebrew discipline, and all the rest of it, rhetoric, a lot of it, but containing true facts, brought me to these untidy green sheets and this rippled mattress? As if anyone cared what he was doing there. As if it affected the fate, the world in any way. It was his own business. "I got a right," Herzog whispered, though his face neither changed nor moved. "Very good." The Jews were strange to the world for a great length of time, and now the world is being strange to them in return. Sono brought out a bottle and spiked his tea with cognac or Shiraz Regal. When she had taken a few nips herself, she gave a playful growl. Herzog could not help laughing. Sono then brought out her scrolls. Fat merchants made love to slender girls, who looked away comically as they submitted. Moses and Sono sat cross-legged on the bed. She pointed to things, winking and exclaiming, and pressing her round face to his. Something was always frying or brewing in the kitchen. A dark closet, rank with fish and soy sauce, seaweed, vermicelli, old tea leaves. The plumbing was often out of order. She wanted Herzog to have a talk with the Negro janitor, who would only laugh at her when she demanded service. Sono kept 2 cats. Their pan was never clean. When Herzog was in the subway coming to see her, he already began to smell those odors of her apartment. Their darkness passed through his heart. He violently desired Sono, and just as violently did not want to go. Even now he felt the fever, remembered the smells, experienced the difficulty. He shivered when he rang her bell. The chain rattled. She pulled open the large door and threw her arms about his neck. Her face was elaborately made up, and she smelled of musk. The cats tried to make an escape. She captured them, and then she cried out, always the same cry, "Mozo, je viens de rentrer." She was breathless. She had run to meet him and beat him home by seconds. Why? Why did she always have to be just under the wire? Perhaps to show that she had an independent and active life. She did not sit waiting. The tall door, with the curved top, admitted him. Sono secured it again, with bolt and chain. precautions of a woman living alone. But she said the super tried to let himself in without knocking. Herzog, with a beating heart but composed face, entered, looked around with pale-faced dignity at the hangings, sienna, crimson, green, and the fireplace stuffed with the wrappings of her latest purchases, the draftsman's table where she did her homework, and where the cats perched. He smiled at eager Sono, and sat down in the Morris chair. "Mauvais temps et chérie," she said, and she began at once to cheer him. She took off his miserable shoes, telling him where she had been. Some lovely Christian Science ladies had invited her to a concert at the cloisters. She had seen a double feature at the Thalia, Daniel Deroux, Simone Signore, Jean Gabin, et Harry Bow Wow. The Nippon America Society invited her to the United Nations building, where she presented flowers to the Nizam of Hyderabad. Through a Japanese trade mission, she also met Mr. Nasir and Mr. Sukarno, and the Secretary of State and the President. Tonight she had to go to a nightclub with a foreign minister of Venezuela. Moses had learned not to doubt her. She always produced a nightclub photograph in which she sat, beautiful and laughing in a low-cut gown. She had Mendes France's autograph on a menu. She would never ask Herzog to take her to the Copacabana. This was a mark of her respect for his deep gravity. Tes philosophie. Oh, mon philosophy, mon professeur d'amour. Tes très important. Je le sais. She rated him higher than kings and presidents. As she put the kettle on for Herzog's tea, she never failed to describe the events of her day from the kitchen at the top of her voice. She saw a three-legged dog, which made a truck swerve into a pushcart. A cab driver wanted to give her his parrot, but the cats would kill it. She could not accept such a responsibility. A panhandling old woman, V.L. Mendiante, got her to buy a copy of the Times for her. That was all the old creature wanted, this morning's Times. A policeman said he would give Sono a ticket for jaywalking. A man had exposed himself behind the subway peeler. Ooh, satant hontox quel chose. She measured with her hands from her own body. 1 foot's mosso très laid. Ka t'a plu, Moses said, smiling. Oh, no, Mozo, no. Elle est vilaine. She was, however, delightfully excited. Moses looked at her gently, suspiciously, as well, perhaps lying back elegantly in the broken reclining chair. The fever he had felt as he was coming had now begun to subside. Even the smells were never quite so bad as he had anticipated. The cats were less jealous of him. They came to be petted. He grew used to their Siamese mewing, more passionate and hungry than that of American cats. Then he said, "Et cette blouse, combien j'ai payé? Dis-moi." "You paid, let me see, you paid $3 for it." "No, no," she cried, 60 cents, solde." "Impossible. Why, that thing is worth $5. You must be the greatest shopper in New York." Gratified, she gave him a brilliant wink and took off his socks, chafing his feet. She brought him tea and poured a double shot of Chivas Regal into it. For him, she kept the best of everything. thou too, scrambled eggs, cherry cocoa. As to fame, a cold rain was killing desolate New York with its green, icy spikes. When I pass Northwest Orient Airlines, I always mean to price a ticket to Tokyo. She put soy sauce on the eggs Herzog ate and drank. All the food was salty. He swallowed a great deal of tea. "We take bath," said Sono, and began to unbutton his shirt. "To view?" Teas and baths, the steam of boiling water loosened the wallpaper from the green plaster behind. The great console radio, through a cloth of gold speaker, played the music of Brahms. The cats were cuffing shrimp shells under the chairs. "Que j'aille bien," he said. He went to run the water. He heard her singing as she sprinkled the lilac salts and bubble bath powder. "I wonder who's scrubbing her now?" Sono asked for no great sacrifices. She did not want me to work for her, to furnish her house, support her children, to be regular at meals, or to open charge accounts in luxury shops. She asked only that I should be with her from time to time. But some people are at war with the best things of life, and pervert them into fantasies and dreams. The Yiddish French we spoke was funny but innocent. She told me no such broken truths and dirty lies as I heard in my own language, and my simple declarative sentences couldn't do her much harm. Other men have forsaken the West, looking for just this. It was delivered for me in New York City. The bath was not without its occasional trials. At times Sono examined Herzog's body for signs that he was unfaithful. Love-making, she was strongly convinced, turned men lean. "Ah," she would say, "tu es maigre, tu fais amour." He denied it, but she shook her head, continuing to smile, though her face became puffy and bitter. She refused to believe him, but she would forgive him at last. Her good humor returning, she put him in the tub, climbing in behind him, singing or growling mock orders at him in military Japanese. But peace had come. They bathed. She put her feet forward for him to soap. She dipped water in a plastic dish and poured it over his head. Draining the tub at last, she turned on the shower to rinse away the suds, and they stood together smiling under the spray. "Tu serais bien propre, cherry coco." Yes, she kept me very clean. With amusement and with sorrow, Herzog recalled it all. They dried themselves with Turkish towels from 14th Street. She dressed him in the kimono, kissing his chest. He kissed the palms of her hands. Her eyes were tender, shrewd. They showed a thrifty light at times. She knew where to invest her sensuality and how to increase it. She sat him on the bed, and there she served him tea. Her concubine. They sat cross-legged, sipping from the small cups, looking at the scrolls. The door was bolted, the telephone off the hook. Tremulous, Sono's face came near, and she touched his cheek with her chub lips. They helped each other out of the oriental garments. "Document, chérie. Oh, l'intimate, oh," turning up her eyes so that he saw only the whites. She tried to explain to me once that Earth and the planets were sucked from the sun by a passing star, as if a dog should trot by a bush and set free worlds. And in those worlds life appeared, and within that life, such as we, souls, and even stranger creatures than we, she said. I liked to hear this, but I didn't understand her well. I know I kept her from returning to Japan. For my sake, she disobeyed her father. Her mother died, and Sono did not mention it for weeks. And once she said, Je ne crains pas la mort, mais tu me fais souffrir, mozo. I hadn't called her in a month. She had had pneumonia again. No one had come to see her. She was weak and pale, and she cried and said, Je souffre trop. But she did not let him comfort her. She had heard that he was seeing Madeline Pontreter. She did, however, say, Elle est machante, mozo. Je suis pas jalouse. Je ferai amour avec un autre. Tu m'as lassé, mais elle est très forte. He wrote, Sono, you were right. I thought you might like to know. Her eyes are very cold. Still, they are her eyes, and what is she to do about them? It would not be practical for her to hate herself. Luckily, God sends a substitute, a husband.